The aim of this session really is to draw upon some of the experience of people who actually not too long ago were in exactly the same position as many of the launchpads companies in this room. And I think for all of the consultants, for all of the advisors, for all of the investors who can offer advice and tips, actually I think it's really important to hear it from those who are actually really our peers and have been engaging in a very similar journey and are wrestling with the same product. So it's really generous for the three of you to have given up your time to kind of offer some insights here today. But without further ado from me really, if you could just introduce yourself and really your company and the journey you've been on in the last couple of years. So Naimish, if I could start with you.
Sure, thanks Patrick. I'm Naimish. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Show My Homework. I used to be a classroom teacher about 5 years ago. And I guess we've really been focusing on tackling the problem of homework. It's been a problem for about 100 years in many different facets. And today we've built a business in London where we employ 75, 80 people now. And we're used by a lot of schools, 1 in 3 across the UK, half of London. And we have customers in a whole number of countries. I would say the one thing, I'm sure there's many things we've learned and there's many problems, but I would say for the launchpad companies, I would really focus on solving a very specific problem that teachers in the classroom face and start with that one thing, and then you can expand on that.
Thanks very much, Naimish. Josh.
So hello, I'm Joshua. I run something called Assembly, and we have come out of the ARC Schools family, and so have I. So I used to be part of ARC, the education charity, helping to run the schools group. And before that, I also set up a children's publishing company, so I've been working in schools in one form or another for about a decade now. Assembly exists to solve 2 problems, really. One is if you're a developer in the schools sector and you have an innovative product, let's pick one out of the air, I don't know, a homework product, for example, just completely off the top of my head. Sooner or later, your product probably needs to know the names of the students in a school or the names of the teachers, core school data, if you will. A really common recurring problem for developers is that's really hard to get hold of. So people pass around CSVs of data or schools manually enter data. We solve that problem. So we have connections to the majority of school systems in the UK. We pull data into our platform and we pass it on to developers through our magical API tools. So in other words, we take a thing that's difficult for developers, getting data out of schools, and we make it automatic and easy. So that's the first thing we do. But the second thing is that we also get data back from those same innovative products, the same group of developers into our platform, and then we solve a problem for schools, which is how do you offer analytics based on all the data you have within your ecosystem. You have data in your school MIS, but also you have data in all of these innovative products you're using around the MIS at the moment. And so we are building consolidated analytics that works from multiple source systems. So we do a little bit for developers and we do a little bit for schools. And I will leave my hopefully golden insights for a little bit later because I can't think of a really punchy one right now.
Thank you, Josh. And last but not least, Justin.
Hi, I'm Justin. I'm the CEO of a company called the Educational App Store, and it's a discovery marketplace for educational apps. For those that know the space, there's now 350,000 educational apps in the marketplace. So it's quite fragmented. So I've come up with my team with the idea of curating it and sorting it out so that parents and teachers can effectively have better screen time with either their pupils or their children at home. And then in the evening, my learned colleagues here, I have co-founded a supper club for EdTech founders, which is has been described as an AA for EdTech founders, but with alcohol. So it's basically therapy for all of us. I know how difficult it is with you guys running and starting these businesses. And just to let you know, there's a great network of founders out there that are supporting one another to build an ecosystem. And that is called the EdTech Exchange.
So I guess the first question I wanted to ask, and I'll ask a few questions and then I know there's going to be a lot of hands on the floor, is I kind of wanted to kind of walk you all back to kind of year zero really. The first few months of setting up your startup and your initiative. What were the main challenges that you faced? I mean, Naimish, you were a teacher and you made a big jump to become a teacherpreneur and to really kind of leap into business. I mean, what kind of issues were you engaging with where you really had to kind of get up to speed very quickly?
Well, the first thing was just being able to solve coding. So engineers are very expensive. Fortunately for me, I'm a geek. I know how to code. I did computer science at uni. That helped. But I would back then engineering was also cheaper to some extent. So I would code in the morning, code in the evening. I would take developers from this side of London to like Wimbledon, pay for their pizza, but to persuade them. So just building out the product was very, very challenging. The second thing was, how do you sell? How do you get trust when you have zero reputation? And plus, again, 5 years ago, we have seen a plethora of kind of, EdTech products and services over the last 5 years, and lots of venture capital, early stage seed funding. Anyone can raise like 50, 100 grand today. I mean, it's really easy. But 5 years ago, you couldn't get £5, and which meant that when I was starting my business, I always had to think about building a sustainable business model, and which meant that I didn't even think about freemium. It was all about my software was not going to be purchased by a teacher. I had to really think about who is my customer. It's the school. Who within the school is my customer? It's someone from the senior leadership team. What are their pain points? What does their day look like? Why are they going to give me 5 minutes? Why is this going to make their life better? And how is it going to help improve ultimately learning outcomes and parents and teachers? So that was a big thing for us, really, really thinking about what is the problem we're solving, and who's the right person within the school that's going to be willing to part money.
And how are you able to get in contact with those people? Because it can be very difficult for even large companies now to find the right people within schools.
I think, when I was teaching, it was just using my own network in the first instance. When you're reaching out to schools, it's really, really hard. But don't try and sell it on the first call. You have to build a relationship, build a rapport, identify. It's easy. That's the great thing about the education space is we know there's 23,000 primary schools in the country. We know there's 4,500 secondary schools. We know where they are. We know how big the school is. We know whether it's in a deprived area, in an affluent area. There's so much information that's available already. It's about, you're not going to sell your product to 1,000 schools overnight. Pick an area. Really, really focus on the specific pain points that those teachers face, and then you can pick up the phone call. And if you're speaking to a receptionist at a school, he or she are not a Rottweiler. You have to get them on board, get them on side. It's not going to happen the first call. You have to be willing to persevere and build that relationship. And I find that's the whole thing with sales. I see a lot of EdTech entrepreneurs and they give up too quickly, or they spend all their money on the tech and forget about the sales and the marketing piece. So that's literally how when I was first started, it helped because I was inside the school. But even those first 30, 40 customers, it was just a lot of emails, a lot of calls, and just trying to build those relationships up. Because if you solve a problem, and those teachers in the trenches, they can resonate with it, they'll give you time.
Yeah. Josh?
Yeah, I'm going to, just before I tell you our year zero, I'm going to just pick up on that. Like I say, I joined ARC, which is an education charity that runs 35 schools in the UK, with my role initially being more about commissioning stuff. So I was the receiver of said phone calls. And I think, other than agreeing with everything Naimish has said, there were two things that used to work for us. One was somebody knowing or guessing or having a decent idea of what we already spent on that area already, and the second was people having a view on the efficacy of their product. So if somebody says, hey, we're a parent messaging thing, we know that the average school spends £2,000 on parent messaging and we cost £300, then I'm interested to read on, because that's A, true, and B, a problem that I'm facing at the moment. And from the efficacy side, I've still not met a principal that won't find budget for a thing that will improve their student outcomes. And the range of ways that you can prove efficacy, even comparatively early on as a startup, is surprisingly wide. I was chatting to the Sam Learning people the other day, and they make a big play on the front page of their website about a study they did with FFT on how their product improves learning outcomes. So I just think refining the pitch to the problems that the person you're talking to faces is a good way of thinking of the sales job. The assembly story, I guess, started about 5 years ago when I joined ARC, and actually in my interview, which was to do a different job, we spent as much time talking about the venture I would want to run if ARC still liked me after my first sort of 6-month consulting-ish job finished. And the confluence of, I guess, the right sort of, or the meetings of minds, you could say, was that I have a background, I guess, in, long story short, being a bit of a data geek. Used to work in consultancy and have done a lot of work in data. And ARC Schools has probably put more money and time into how it manages data than any other school or group of schools in the UK. And so from day one, the pitch was, how do we as a group help schools to use data more effectively? And I've been given time, originally no time, no budget, but a mandate, and that became a bit of time and a bit of budget, and then a business plan and a sort of an organisation took shape 2 or 3 years ago, and we've been going and sort of firing on all cylinders and sort of really with public products, I suppose, for the last 18 months or so. And it's been a nice story. I think that the point to take out of that, the learning to glean, was this is not true for everyone. I have founders I know who I admire where their first idea was brilliant and they never looked back. But of all the entrepreneurial things I've always done, it's generally been the third business plan, which is the one I'm glad we put time, money and energy into. And I was really lucky that ARC sort of were patient enough whilst I was doing a different job to read a first business plan and go, yeah, no, but let's keep working on that. And then a second business plan, which was closer, and it was actually 2 years of redrafting business plans before we started to get a team on board. And once you're at the stage, we are a team of 12, that's a lot of money to burn. You want to, at that point, be somewhat confident, hopefully very confident, that you've got a solid idea there. And if you want to distill all of that without my waffling, there's a great blog by a guy called Marty Kagan called Your Business Plan is Wrong, which probably says everything I've just said more succinctly, writing about tech. And that's a thought I've always held in my mind as a great thing to think of with tech is, even if you have the kernel of a good idea, could it get better before you spend a lot of money on it?
Thank you. And Justin?
It's always difficult coming at the end of a
I'll
conversation
look around in a minute.
and everybody said what it needs to be said. What was year zero like? I think you're looking for stability and consistency in 2 areas. That would be one, emotionally, because you're a startup and you're going through a hell of a lot as an entrepreneur. You've sacrificed a great amount, probably your salary, which is the first thing, which is hard. Anybody that has no money will know what it's like, and it can take it away from you. It can take yourself, your motivation away. And the second thing is finding stability financially. So as an entrepreneur in my first year, I was making sure that emotionally I could get that stability in the product and the venture that I put time into. And then I had to look at how financially that could be stable going forward. Everything that the guys have said, building out successful businesses around product and a genuine need, is important, but I would like to bring up it's also important to have cash. Let me say everything. You must have the best products in the world, but if you've got no money in the bank, you're going to have a bit of a challenge in the first year. So I'm not trying to be a doom monger, but I better bring up that cash is pretty important at this stage, right? Because you can't turn on the lights and you can't survive solely on water for 52 weeks. It's difficult. So we need to think about that cash element.
So one thing that's been touched upon, which I'd like to unpack a little bit more, is about the recruitment of teams. So, Naimish, you've got a substantial team now. Josh, you said yours is growing very rapidly. You're only as good as your team. You can have a great product, but if you don't have a great team working to deliver, to sell, to develop it, then you're not going to get anywhere. So, what tips would you give startups that are now thinking about expanding their teams around finding the right people, and then obviously making sure that you hold on to them as well?
I see it in kind of 3 stages. So the startup phase, the kind of business phase, and then kind of the company phase. And at the startup phase, you really want people that are just super smart, willing to do a bit of everything. There's no egos, they have great attitude, whatever it takes, they're willing to do. So whether, you have to send them to Southend or Inverness, it's like, when am I going? And, they just get shit done. Sorry if I'm not allowed to say that, but yeah, they just get stuff done. And then at the next stage, when the business is kind of from a startup, it's starting to become a business. You end up with people that have unbelievable company spirit, attitude, that fight, but not necessarily the experience. And that's the point when we've made a big mistake is we've not brought on the right amount of experience early enough. So what happens is, in one sense, it's like you're a small band and you're playing in front of 50 people, and the lead singer can't sing, and the guitarist hasn't tuned his guitar, and the drummer can't play a beat, but it's all okay because there's only 20 of us. And then as you start growing, suddenly you've got 100,000 people, and the same group are still going out there, when what you need is some experience. Say, guys and girls, before we go out, I just need to make sure that everyone knows their lines and the guitar's tuned. Otherwise we collapse. And we went through a period where we were growing, hiring, and we had great intentions in the business, but just you can't buy it. Well, you can buy experience, it's expensive, but you need people that have got scars, and I think so. You need a bit more experience, and that costs money. But hopefully, you're in a position where you can slowly afford that.
And how do you identify them? I suppose just before we move on to Josh on this, because how do you? Because there's lots of people that are very good at pretending they've got scars, and talking the talk. But actually, how do you kind of sort out the wheat from the chaff?
It's really, really hard. I mean, like in any interview process, some of my biggest mistakes have been hiring and senior experienced people, like you said, who've got an amazing CV. I always kind of think about in three areas, attitude, knowledge, and skills. And fundamentally, I always think about they got a good attitude. And so you try and ask questions in interviews that trying to get that out. I also believe companies don't have values, but people have values. And so if you can align yourself with people that share similar values with you in your personal life, the kind of people you hang about with, the way you talk to your mum and dad, the relationships you have with your spouse, your siblings, and you can bring those sort of people into your environment, you naturally, it's like a magnet. You naturally start to get drawn to those sort of people, and then that's where you get what I call that discretionary productivity. So you give people more money, it's a bit like McDonald's, it'll satisfy them for a couple of weeks, short period, but then they'll want more money again. You want to, if you can align yourself with people that have similar values to you, they're really mission driven.
Justin, I'm going to go to you this time, so you don't feel last.
Oh, thank you. Carrying on from where Naimish has left off, when I'm looking at people, I'm looking for intelligence, energy and integrity, because a lot of the skill sets they may not have for the business at the start, and it's very difficult to get the perfect hire. So you have to have some fundamentals that you're looking for, particularly in the startup world. And when I mean intelligence, I don't need a PhD, but I need someone, as I mentioned earlier, that's emotionally intelligent. When the pressure or the product isn't going as well as we first planned, we then turn around and say, okay, what we're going to do about it? We don't all sit down and cry, because it's just not going to get the matter sorted out. We need to rally around, and we need to get the product or the solution to fit the need that's been asked of it. Energy, wow. In education, to quote a saying, someone said this is not a marathon, but it's an Ironman. Yeah? This is a different sector. This is a sector with its own characteristics, and as was described earlier on a couple of the other panels, it is a little bit slower than other sectors, but it doesn't mean that it's not valuable and it's not profitable, and it can be done. But you have to have a huge amount of energy. How you do that is by just basically digging deep and getting out there. You've got to be seen, you've got to be in the space, you've got to be talking to others, because it is a very hearts and mind sector. People do in education have some emotional connection to it, and that is what part of your delivery. You've got to be emotionally connected to what you're doing if you're in the educational space. And then last but not least, after energy, is the integrity. As an entrepreneur or starting up a business, you've got to make sure that the people that you're with, as you said, share the common basics, but at the same time, you don't want to be looking over your back or making sure that they haven't covered your back. If you go forward and you've got a team, you want to make sure that that team's got your back. You're not competing against other people in the team over politics or something which is completely irrelevant. You all have to be focused on that one thing, and that one thing needs to be done well. So in summary, hiring, intelligence, energy and integrity.
Josh, thank you.
So I'll try and pick up two specifics. The most important hire I have made to date is my CTO. Shock horror, I'm not a developer, so I'm not our CTO. And as any of you who are in a similar situation, however far you're on, will know and recognize, if your product and reputation is your tech, you need your tech to be good. And there's no magic answer, but what I will say, and this comes also from other entrepreneurial things I've done previously, if there's a position as important as that, and it's a skill set you don't have, in our situation, I was willing to pay up to what I earn for that role. We're a non-profit, so actually we don't have the options shares question that other people do. We're rewarded in other ways. We're a nice place to be. In an entrepreneurial thing I've done before, I was willing to give a co-founder up to and the same share of equity that I had, and a little bit that, that sounds, often people are very unwilling to give away those things, but from my perspective, it's saying if there is a position that's key, I actually want that relationship to become, doesn't have to be at the beginning, it can be over 3 years you'll get to that point, your options will earn over this period, but I want that person to be like a co-founder because it's so crucial to the organization. So that's how I've approached the CTO role, and we're very lucky, we've got a great CTO and I'm enormously relieved about that. Just with sales, and actually we talk about this quite a lot, the EdTech Exchange, and I've had some conversations that have influenced me. I won't go into lots of detail, but I've heard companies that have regretted taking sales away from the founders and moving it to a sales manager or a head of sales too soon. Now that can be a logical progression, and once sales is a humming machine, particularly if you sell a repeatable sale, a product where actually the sale to each school is different, that's a thing that can be delegated or moved to the right person sooner rather than later. I also know a lot of successful EdTech organizations that are teams of 10, 20, where sales are led by the founder and often still completed and closed by the founder. Now, there are risks of that as well, and there's risks of keeping your reins too sort of tight. But certainly in the world we are, our sales are relationships as much as sales. Sort of every sale is slightly different, and we've just brought in somebody as a sales manager. We've had the job on our business plan for a year, and from my perspective, it was wait until I find the person who I think would talk about things as articulately as me, so I won't be scared if they're not in the room, and actually it's somebody who could probably do my job bluntly. So, you need to have that level of confidence, and I think that's important, not feeling like sales is a sort of an org chart job that you just fill a role in with, but that, much like the technology, is your reputation and your future cash flows, and therefore it should be important enough to take your time as a founder.
So one of the questions that came up in an earlier panel, and one of the points that was made as well, is around the need for startups to be extremely nimble. So to be quick-footed, and if a product isn't working, then you have to say, right, that isn't working, let's move on to something else. But Naimish, I think your point as well about being focused and really kind of developing not trying to be all things to all men, but taking a scattergun approach, but actually identifying a problem and then trying to build a solution to it is also very important. So how do you get that balance? Because I'm sure there are some points in your journeys so far you've realised that you're going down an avenue that just isn't going to work for you. At what point do you actually decide to kind of back up and go down another path, or at what point do you decide to kind of persevere? Could you talk a bit around that? Because I'm sure a lot of people will be facing those kind of issues.
I think I think Justin mentioned this. Education is slow, and there's definitely, if you're selling in the space, there's definitely seasonality. The terms are very different. I don't really think of things in quarters, but spring term, autumn term, it's very different in terms of the way people think about purchasing, thinking about rolling out software. So you really have to think about that in the back of your mind before you decide to just ditch your product. And particularly in terms of the sales, it will take time. It will take time for you to figure out what's working, what's not working. I think it also comes down to complete conviction. How much do you believe in what you're doing? Is it really solving a problem? And you have to be willing to take criticism and be open from people you don't know, real teachers, and almost create a list of things, like a hypothesis of why it won't work as opposed to why it will work, and try and prove those things, because that will give you more a real answer. For us, we've done a few things where we felt this isn't really our bag, so we've not done it. And you sort of know after kind of 3 to 4 months. You kind of know after 3 to 4 months. But I think, yeah, anyone new, if I was doing something completely new again, I would just focus on one thing. Focus on that one thing and really go deep on it. And then once you start doing that, you can expand out. Yeah. But that's, yeah, because it's just too hard. If you go start up a EdTech business today and go, we're going to try and do, you know, we're going to build an MI system, or we're going to try and do 50 different things, it's just not going to happen.
Josh?
Yeah, to pick up on that point, a real trend, and this is a trend that has been going on for 5 years, but now is, I think, established, is that education has gone appy. People buy special purpose, single purpose products in a way they didn't 6 years ago. 6 years ago, people asked for a module of an MIS. Now people will still have an MIS that does a core job, but people are willing to buy special purpose products outside, and that's an opportunity. That means your product can be thinner, bluntly, but really good at that one thing, and it will find itself with a market. The way I would think of how do you choose what to pursue and what not to, which is really the core question here. I think most businesses go through that period of, we've got a few ideas, which one do we go with, and this is, I was talking to somebody about this recently, all of my best ideas are stolen, so I'm sort of borrowing from someone else, but I think there's too much thought within EdTech about product, and that's good because product should be, you know, your core focus, and not enough thought about market. And I have seen many people with great product ideas, but when exposed to the chill winds of who's your commissioner, what budget do they have access to, will they actually buy it, the idea falls down. So to give a specific, because that's a bit generic, you could have a great idea for a product for a multi-academy trust to be used in all schools within a multi-academy trust. I know the multi-academy trust sector quite well, and there are still very few multi-academy trusts that do central procurement for any of their tech. Like, I mean, it's amazing that that is not happening more quickly. So your idea could be great, and you'll go and speak to somebody in the central office, and they'll go, yeah, I'd love that. Let me go and speak to 34 schools, and we'll try and reach a consensus and come back to you. Now, I'm oversimplifying, but actually you can have a brilliant idea for a product, and your market will not be there, even though it should be, and even though that's wrong. Whereas actually, if you have an idea for a product, and you know that it's the head of maths that buys it, and you know that the average secondary school has a budget of this much for that, and you know that you can replace an existing product and you're half the price of that, then you've got a market, right? So I think not just thinking about the product, but thinking really about the market from the commissioner's perspective, and trying to even market size that. You can tell I'm an ex-consultant, but like, well, if the average school has a £250 budget for this, there are 25,000 schools in the country, that means the market is this big. I think really obsessing about the market as well as the product is a smart thing to do.
Justin?
Cutting and running.
Now?
No, not now. Tez's observation earlier I felt was quite prevalent when they said they buy people, people buy people. So they look at the founder and they have a chat with the founder, and they look at that commitment in the founder, that when they know they're in the trenches, they're not going to buckle and run and get out. They don't want to do. So ultimately, the first thing is about the founder's commitment, and people buy people, particularly with sales as well. As I said, this is really a motive, an emotive sector. The other thing that, before cutting and run, I think about is sometimes as the entrepreneur, you have to do so many jobs, and you only do one or two particularly well, and the rest you do okay. Now, there is nothing wrong with admitting that you don't have the expertise in a field, but the key skill that you need is to go out and find that expertise. You hear so many stories from entrepreneurs and people that have set up things, when in the final moment, when they decide to quit, they quit and it doesn't go any further. But those that pushed on through and got the expertise to find out what the problem was the start of a very beautiful journey onwards. And you hear it with mining, particularly in mining. You get mining companies that go out and mine, and they're generally just a few meters from one of the biggest veins in the world, but they didn't have the expertise or the knowledge, or the pride stood in the way and said, well, I won't get experts in because I know what I'm doing. Well, if you knew what you're doing, you'll be getting gold or oil out. So get an expert in, and then the vein may be just a couple of meters away. So my point is, before you cut and run, always try and get some expertise in before you make that final decision that you think this is done.
Great. I'm going to go to the floor.
My name's George Olson. I'm founder of Find Out Pressure. It's a way of connecting university applicants to university students for advisory conversations before accepting an offer. I was wondering about the idea of focusing on one thing, and how that might translate across into your marketing talk and how you talk to potential customers, because although you might be focusing on one thing, there might be multiple benefits that single thing produces for the university or the school. So in your marketing, and should you just focus on one benefit, or should you try and focus on all benefits? Could that confuse the messaging perhaps?
I think one thing can be multiple benefits. I'll make it a quick answer for sure. I think the two can go together. In fact, one thing probably should be multiple benefits. They can be tailored for different audiences, but yours is an area that there's a lot of thought about at the moment, and it's ripe for innovation. There are a bunch of people with slightly different products in that sector, and in a sense, tailoring your message because your product is unique and special doesn't mean you only need to have one benefit. It's just about knowing that they're the most relevant ones, and I suppose not having 7 things when 3 would make the point. But no, one thing doesn't need to be one benefit for sure.
I was just wondering, if Naimish, who was your first employee? Like, what was their job role?
My first employee was a guy called John. He joined the business a year and a half after I started the business, and I put him in a matchbox with a fake window, and it looked like there was only one door. You had to walk in and you had to moonwalk out. And he worked with me for the first year for about 200 quid a month. I'd known him since I was like 15, 16, but I absolutely trusted him. He had no background in education. I just taught him as much as I knew. And then the other thing about equity, later when I raised an early stage round of funding, I gave him equity in the business. I gave him a co-founder status to recognize all the effort that he put in. But on that note, when you do give equity to if you're looking for like a CTO or whoever else, I would be really careful about giving equity away instantly, because you're both really excited. It's a brand new business. We're going to conquer the world, and 6 months later, he or she decides they want to go to Brazil for 3 months. You're in a position where the company's already formed. You've already given equity away, and that becomes problemsome. So one bit of advice I would say is, this is outside of the question, but one bit of advice I would say is just say happy to give you X amount, but it will vest over X number of years. Yeah. So if they disappear between that time, you can go and give that equity to go to someone else. Yeah.
Actually, a question around kind of equity, not just equity for staff, but also investors. I mean, I'm sure. I know, Josh, you're in a slightly different position because you're backed by ARC. But I mean, for Naimish and Justin, I'm sure various investors are probably in touch with you and courting you all the time. How do you engage in that dialogue? Because obviously you don't necessarily want to close the door entirely, but you may also not feel it's the right time for you as well.
If you're going to go down that road, it takes up a lot of time. Takes up a massive amount of time. So be really, really clear about how much money you want to raise. Be clear about what you want to do with that money. And then number 3, there's so much capital out there, right? Create a hit list. Figure out kind of what sort of investor do you want. It's like getting married. Be mindful of kind of and everyone in the venture space, in the investor space, is so nice. Everyone, because that's their job. They'll make you feel special. They make every single person feel special. So don't get, you have to just take that with a pinch of salt. But define a hit list, create a hit list. And then, like Justin said, people do business with people. People want to back people, ultimately. So you have to build that rapport. And I would just say that's the, and don't give too much of your equity away too soon. Again, I think the world has changed. It's really easy to raise 50 to 100 grand today. The big challenge is, how do you go from that? You've got an idea to raise the next round. How do you raise a couple of million? But there's lots of angel networks. I mean, there's just tons and tons of places where you can raise cash. Yeah,
well, actually, just pushing on that, because I know you said it's really easy, but there may be some people that are struggling at the moment. I mean, what advice would you give to them? Where should they be looking?
So I would say, first of all, if you want to look for some of the places in EdTech are Emerge Lab, accelerators, angel networks. So you've got the London Angel Network, you've got the Cambridge Angel Network. There's lots and lots of these sort of places. And plus, if you look at, there's lots and lots of, if you just type in early stage VCs in London, there's lots and lots of these firms. They will give you a meeting. They will give you a meeting. And if they never think that a meeting is a waste of time. If they don't put money, ask them, is there anyone else that you think that I should be talking to? Is that, can you recommend anyone else in this space? Or it's a small knit world, so most people tend to help each other out. But don't ever go into a meeting. Good one. Don't ever go into a meeting asking with an NDA. Don't ever go to a VC and go, here's an NDA, because they're just. Yeah. It's the wrong thing to do. It's not the right etiquette.
If you're going into a VC or going into any investor, ask for advice rather than cash. Don't go in asking for cash because you won't be there very long. VCs or any funder, I would be as diligent with the investor as I would be with anything, because the reason I say that is there are people out there with money, but they're possibly not going to build the skill set that you require for the business. And there are type of different investors. Some are passive, some are active, and you need to understand where they sit on that spectrum. Some people just want a passive investor where they just want cash to scale out their existing cash capability. And then some people need cash just to survive. And those that want cash to survive generally find themselves with people that are quite active as in terms of investors. So they will want some voice in what you're doing. So please go careful when you're choosing your investors. Choose it like any other partner that you have in life. Go very careful. Thirdly, equity is like blood. You've only got 8 points of it. Yeah? Don't give it away. You do, I shouldn't say that. I do donate blood, all right? Just in case someone starts going, all right? But my point is, it's like blood. You've only got a certain amount of it. Don't give it away too early. And the best time to give it away is when your business is making cash and you want to make more cash. Yeah? So try to take as minimum amount of investment at the very beginning as you can possibly survive on. Yeah? Even if it's toast every day for a year. Just try to keep your equity, because I'm telling you, as it goes forward, it just gets bigger and more valuable. Would you agree, guys?
Yeah. I mean, just because you're in a slightly different situation in that you kind of chose your backer from the outset.
Well, a little bit, though. We have raised other money. The angle I was going to pick up on, so we're a non-profit. We're a joint venture from ARC and another foundation called Neon, and that is probably a bit unusual in these circumstances. What I would add is that the sector we actually know very well is the social capital sector, and there are funders out there of for-profit businesses like Nesta and Ivy UK, to name two that we know well, who explicitly invest in companies that sell to schools, and their requirements might involve something in your articles about being nice human beings, but frankly, I've not yet met an EdTech venture that is utterly charlatan, ruthless, or heartless, and if they are, I advise them to go and set up an insurance brokerage or something where it's easier to use those skills to make money, because EdTech, nobody gets into it to mine for cash. So I think rarely have I come across an EdTech venture that would struggle to put those things into their articles, and just bear in mind that side of things, that there's the VC side of things, but there are also social investors who are good for a quite decent amount of money and might suit your values quite well.
Angels are the key place for startups. Yeah. Angels, individual.
This is a question for Naimish, but also potentially for others as well. So am I right in understanding you were a sole founder?
Yeah, so when I started the business, I was the sole founder. I started the business on my own. I put my own cash into it, and then a year and a half later, you want to recognise other people in the business. Yeah. And then I gave equity because I felt he deserved it. And we also have other staff in the company who have equity. Yeah.
What I'm interested in, I'm in a similar situation. I'm a ex-teacher and also developer, so I've built a product myself. And I'm just wondering whether you faced any challenges around kind of trust in the sense that is a liability. Being a sole founder, that's often seen as something that might be strike against you when it comes to investment or even to customers.
No, I think you can bring. I think you've got to trust your gut. If you don't trust people around, like your potential co-founder, just walk away. Yeah. Okay, so trust your gut, that conviction you have. I believe in me anyway, my gut. And if something's telling you inside, it might not bite today, but you might come back and it will come back and haunt you. Yeah. And things I've learned from we've had many challenges is I really trust my gut. Like I have complete conviction over that, and it's a tough one, but yeah, it's down to you and that person, right? So when I made John a co-founder, one of the reasons was also you get entrepreneurs relief, which is a massive saving when you're an entrepreneur. So when the business one day may sell for a lot of money, on the first 10 million you only pay 10% tax. It's not, these sort of things are worth considering. To some point. I know that doesn't sound very educational. I'm talking about money.
No, it's
as business people in here, that's something to think about.
And
Just very quickly, having been a sole founder of a previous business, children's publishing company, I would say number one, the best decision I made the business is still going, was to bring in a co-founder, but it was 6 months later, and exactly as Naimish said, with the shares vested, so I had half of the company and she could earn up to half the company over 3 years. And the second thing I would say, and it's just worth being specific about things that have worked for people in the past, is our agreement actually was that we would both take zero money in return, and that was part of giving so much equity away. So she was earning her position both in terms of being willing to work for free, and that sort of justified the equity, and the business wouldn't have worked without her. I'm quite sure of that. So we absolutely, although she was in 6 months later, think of ourselves as co-founders. I had somebody else I was talking to before her, arguably the second best decision I made was to not take on that co-founder, because it would have been a disaster. And you can see these things with hindsight, but I think you could summarize that as, I think you don't need to have a co-founder. There are plenty of businesses with one owner that get trust and credibility in the market. But if you trust your gut, and if you structure something that actually works for the business, where they earn whatever bit that they're given, I think a co-founder is a great way of bringing in skills really cheaply that you need to be successful.
Another question I have is around working with other players within the ecosystem. I mean, it's great that you're here sharing your knowledge here today. There are concerns, especially when you've just come up with a brand new idea and you're taking it out to market, that actually the more you talk in an ecosystem with other players, with other competitors, the more likely they are to steal your idea and to replicate it and basically kind of steal away your competitive advantage. How do you walk that line? And I think maybe to Justin first, because you work obviously with the EdTech Exchange, and you're bringing together collaborators but also competitors, and it is an interesting line to have to walk.
It is, and it's not one at the moment that's presented itself as a challenge, and I think that's because no one has had that substantial exit that they can look at to say, oh well, if I do my job really well, that's where I'm going to end up. At the moment, the industry or the sector is so nascent and embryonic that it's like any other community that is forming. You have a network effect when you start talking and working with one another that strengthens the system in itself. And then when the system shows that it can sustain certain businesses and there's exits, then it may become quite competitive. But at this point in time, where we're still at that embryonic stage, the sharing of knowledge, to me, is fundamental to sustain the ecosystem. And so we don't find it a threat. And you have to learn control. You have to, if you're in a situation where you're having dinner, you don't have to spill your heart out. You can spill bits out, but you need to learn a bit of control in terms of what you're going to say. Yeah, that's just common sense. You have to do that with any situation. So I don't think it's a problem. Do you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see it as a problem. I think competition is really healthy, and what I see is, as long as it's done with integrity, as long as there's competition with integrity, I'm comfortable with that. What I'm seeing is there's lots and lots of technology solutions in the space, including us, where you start to see overlaps. You start to see overlaps. So there's lots of products in the market where people may start to do what you do, and then they sort of become, and then it just creates noise, and it impacts everyone in the ecosystem. So and what happens is, in my mind, when that starts to happen, it impacts everyone's value, because there's lots of people in the education system who are not necessarily the most tech savvy, most commercially minded. So it's quite easy sometimes to say, oh, this is free, I'll go for this one. And yet the net impact of that of it putting in place another piece of technology in a school where suddenly it doesn't work very well, teachers get disheartened, and it's like another system put in place that didn't work. It's like a vicious cycle. But yeah, I think you should not be afraid of competition. You will get people that copy in the tech space, but I think building a business is far more than just the software side. It's what I call it, like internally, like software and a service. And the DNA of a company cannot be copied. People might be able to copy features and X, Y, and Z. They cannot copy the DNA of the company in terms of the way they operate, the culture, the people. You just can't buy that, and you can't. Yeah, people can't copy that either. And if you believe in that and you have a long-term view, when I say long-term view, you're willing to go through the really difficult periods. I think it's a bright future.
Josh?
Yeah, I would summarise it like this. People massively overvalue ideas. This is in all forms of entrepreneurialism, and massively undervalue execution. I remember when I set up my children's publishing business, and when our 4th book was launched, there were travel books for children. Somebody came up to us at our 4th book launch and said, I had this idea a year before you, but ours were going to look much nicer. Right. That's weird because we're at my book launch, not yours. But I've seen that again and again ever since. I've spoken to schools who use Naimish's product, use Show My Homework, that have got rid of a product that on paper does 3 times as much as Naimish's product because they didn't need the 3 times as much. Conceptually, you could say, well, they both did things with homework and assessment and parent-teacher-school relations. The idea is impressive when you hear the idea behind Show My Homework, but it's the execution that gets schools buying it. So all of that's my way of saying I hugely value talking to other people. I'm a member of the EdTech Exchange because you have dinners with competitors and you choose what you share and you choose what you don't, and everyone gets better and it's a rising tide. And I think education is good at being friendly in that way. I would encourage people to think in that way. If it goes badly for you, then scrub this bit of the video. Don't forget that I said that. But that is an ethos that people have in education, and I think it works for us.
We're all trying to get schools, obviously, to buy our products, for the majority of us. So what's been your best marketing route to get kind of a lot of schools back from a specific marketing campaign that you've done? I don't know if you want to answer that there.
You know, the daddy in the room has got to be Naimish at 2,000 schools.
I would say there's no silver bullet.
There you go.
I mean, I wish there was. And there's also difference between primary and secondary schools as well. Like, you have to distinguish different go-to strategies. The unit economics of having a sales team for primary schools doesn't add up because the schools are too small. And so there's a different strategy for primary schools, whereas secondary schools, the deal sizes are larger, may well be larger, so you may be able to afford a sales team. But what I find is, I think both Justin and Joshua touched on it, is like, in education, the people, you cannot be a faceless company in education. You have to be physically willing to go out there, you know, travel here, there and everywhere, stay in crap places, eat bread, do whatever it takes, but physically going out there, getting in front of people, walking into a school, you know, that's the best place, because teachers will see your enthusiasm, your passion. They'll be able to resonate that you empathise with their world, what they looks like. As Justin said, it's a different world, and you have to really be able to put yourself in their position. But when you're getting your first 50 schools, just try and talk to as many teachers as possible, but don't be fluffy about it. Be direct. Ask them. You know, tell them what you want from it. Because teachers also, they love to have a chat about this, that, and anything, but you have to be able to control that conversation so you get something out of it. Otherwise, it's just a waste of time.
Just speaking from being at a lot of education shows with our companies, I just back Naimish up on that, because even though you've got kind of co-founders now, you've got a team, it's you're there with your brand at those exhibitions around the world, kind of doing the hard work. And I think that kind of people see the brand and see you. And I think that sort of pays dividends all the way through.
We're almost out of time, but I do have one final question, and that's around the current climate post-Brexit. It's tough for schools out there at the moment. We've seen research earlier on today that says that they're looking to tighten their belts and rein in ICT expenditure. But still, all the same, I think Josh's point was very important around the fact that if a head of ICT or a head teacher looks at a product and thinks actually this is going to transform my kids' education, usually they can find money for it. And you know, it's great that you guys are making waves, as the session puts it, in this climate. What advice would you give to other startups who are engaging with schools that are having to make difficult budgetary decisions in the way they haven't in a generation? You know, is there still scope to be optimistic? Josh?
Yeah, I'll start. I'm an optimist, so discount everything I'm about to say with that. But I think there's huge scope to be optimistic. I'm chair of governors, or have been for the last 3 years, chair of governors of 2 primary schools within the ARC network. And we were startup schools, so our budgets are fairly small for primary schools. And you know what? If something is going to make a significant impact on pupil outcomes in some form in our school, we can find the money. We can always find the money. So I would come back to these points about who are the commissioners, because commissioners have budgets and they might be choosing between you and something else, but then your pitch needs to be better. So think about who you're pitching to and come back to the what will resonate with a school. If you find a problem that a school is solving expensively or they're solving poorly and you help solve that problem more cheaply or better, then you'll find a commissioner that will want it and you will create or grow a market. I think it is a hard time for somebody where their product is in an established, mature market and it's you or the competition and margins are being squeezed. But the great thing about innovative products is they're more likely to have a go at being the we're cheaper or better or we improve outcomes in this particular way. So that's the kind of pitch I think that will always get resonance, but certainly can still get resonance at the moment.
Justin?
I don't know enough about I don't know enough about the schools, but what I would say is, in any business situation, is that if you need to pivot because you're not getting the revenue in that is required to support the business, then don't be hesitant in that decision, because there are very many revenue lines that can be found in opportunities if you look at them in a different way. So you reverse engineer a problem, come back from the other way and look at why your situation isn't working, and you might find an opportunity that exists as you reverse engineer. So for me, if the schools are difficult, it's not going to be forever, but if you're in survival mode, then my suggestion would be to look at what other options there are and be strict with yourself in regards to how long you keep knocking that door. You find another option, and then if that door isn't opening, find another door to open. But you have to be, I think you need to be strong with yourself, particularly if you're using your own funds and building out a startup.
Thanks, Justin. Naimish?
Yeah, I would say post-Brexit, it's not really been an issue for us in terms of schools. We've just had our best term 1 since the start of the business. I would say in schools there's a notion that we've got no money, we've got no money, and usually I don't know, it just seems to be common, but there is money. There is money in and you know, with the bursar, with the head. But I think what Josh has said, if it solves a real problem, it's going to improve the school, improve the outcomes. People will recognise that. You know, people will recognise that, and there's also different buckets. And knowing what the buckets are in schools is also important in how you position your offering. But yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's a slow. You need a long-term game. I mean, a long-term view. You know, I see people who are in the space who may interested in, you know, like what I call a quick flip, and that's also okay. But I think to build, I mean, if that's, I guess the point I'm making is, if that's what you're interested in, at least you're what you know. You know, be clear when you're starting out on your journeys. Be clear about, are you willing to spend the next 10 years? Are you willing to spend the next 3 years? Have an end game. Have an end game about where you see, and that will really help with your decision making around what Justin said. When do you know? You know, if you have that framework, that will help you determine whether it's now the time to say goodbye and do something else, or do I continue to persevere because I know I'll get through this difficult period.
And there's no such thing as failure. And for all your entrepreneurs out there that are truly at the coalface, you are not failing, you're just not meeting your expectations, right? And that's a different way of looking at it, because that will mentally help you. Because when you're sat there and you're on your own, and a lot of people, are family, friends, are thinking you're a complete lunatic and they're going to put you in a white jacket and take you away, you're just not hitting your expectations, all right? But you haven't done anything wrong. It's the journey to the next stage.
Justin, Josh and Naimish, thank you so much for your insights.